Good morning and welcome to the H&V News HVAC Safety Summit. I'm delighted to introduce a packed and varied programme covering the many issues currently around HVAC safety. From IAQ to fire safety to the new building safety regulatory regime, there's a lot to talk about. We can't put on a programme like this without our sponsors. You'll hear from them later in one way or another, but for now, grateful thanks to Swagon, to Xylem, and to Panasonic. Now we have plenty of opportunities for questions during the day, but the key message is please use the Q&A, not the chat function. And the other thing to say is we will do our best to get all your questions answered in one way or another, but they may not be asked exactly as you write them down because using the chairman's skill, we'll try and roll one or two together, but we'll try and get as many questions answered as we can. And we'll have a proper debate. Now, it was way back in 2016 that H&V News held an IAQ question time in London. Back in those days, I think it's fair to say that the phrase was not widely used. Now, I think we can say for certain it is widely used, and what a lot has changed in the intervening 4.5 years. In that context, it gives me great pleasure to welcome back the keynote speaker from that very question time, a man who I'm glad to say is still campaigning just as vigorously for clean air. So to open off the summit, can I welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Simon Burkitts.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
You're welcome.
Let me just crank up here. Right. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the battle for indoor air quality, and at times it has felt like a battle. I've been going since 2006, so next month it will be Clean Air in London's 15th birthday. And this slide gives a sense of really how we started, what our first principles were. I had this sort of vision that people who were setting climate change targets for 2030 and 2050 were like generals behind the front lines in the First World War, drawing sweeping lines to invade through France or Germany, depending on which side they were on. But really, the battle for clean air is fought in that top left box, which is air pollution, local air pollution in our cities. And those are the trenches, and that is where often air quality is well over World Health Organization guidelines and legal limits. We're very close now this year in London to complying with World Health Organization guidelines for air quality, 15 years after I started. But as you'll hear later, the World Health Organization is producing new guidelines this year, which are likely to set me a much tougher target to hit. Anyway, this is what it is, and what I hope is that by tackling through political leadership, technology and lifestyle change, air pollution in that top left box, that we can show everyone, everywhere, how to tackle the wider air pollution problems. And it really comes together with COP26, the UN Climate Change Conference later this year in November, because that will be the most important global environmental meeting since 2015. So just rewind a moment, what is air pollution? I think of it as local air pollution and greenhouse gases. And the local air pollution in turn splits between particles and gases. The particles are regulated as a lump for health and legal purposes up to a certain diameter, PM 2.5 or PM 10, which you'll have heard of very often. So it's a whole cloud of particles. Whereas the gases are regulated by the individual gases. So you'll have heard of nitrogen dioxide in particular, where legal limits are widely breached or have been. But of course, that cloud of gases can include many other gases as well. And we do need to worry, we've found or been reminded, sadly, of the importance of pathogens such as COVID-19. So what is the health advice? Well, air pollution is the world's largest environmental health risk, killing an estimated 7, possibly 8 million people every year. World Health Organization guidelines were published in 2005, in fact, actually 2006, but dated 2005. And they've published a raft of further advice and guidance since. But I just mentioned this one in the indoor air context, which is that common sense tells you that the same standards that should apply to protect people outside should apply inside, unless there's a particular reason why they won't. So I just refer you to that. It's also worth remembering the tragic death of Ella Roberta Adu Kissy Deborah, and the inquest into her death at the end of last year confirmed that air pollution, it put air pollution on her death certificate, and also confirmed that air pollution significantly caused and significantly contributed to that young girl's death, age 9. New World Health Organization guidelines are due in 2021, which is very good news that they're coming out, in particular before COP26. I have no inside information, but I think those could possibly even halve the WHO guideline for particles in nitrogen dioxide, so from 10 to 5 and 40 to 20, possibly not that much, but certainly a long way down. And there's no safe level of exposure in particular to particles. I think they could come out as soon as May, so do watch this space, because a lot of guidance will need updating after that. Where can I find information about outdoor air pollution? Well, there is quite a lot out there. The link I've put on this slide takes you through to a whole lot of local networks. There are also DEFRA forecasts, and I've been extremely rude about those over the years, because you look at the map and it's green for 330 days a year, because they're showing you today's air pollution versus alert levels, not the recommended annual guideline. So guess what? It looks green for most of the year when we're exporting our pollution onto the continent. So for 30 days a year, you get air pollution episodes typically, and they can be really quite high. There are a variety of modeling sources, computer modeling of air pollution locally, even down to 20 meter squares, even 5 meter squares. And there are some new websites. I mentioned one there, addresspollution.org. And you can conduct your own monitoring using nitrogen dioxide diffusion tubes or something similar. So what is different indoors? Well, of course, indoors you will get outdoor air pollution coming in, infiltration or through supply air. That's obvious. But indoors you will get many sources which are unique to the indoor environment. Cleaning products, cooking, and in particular gas stoves are a problem. You'll get dust, of course, fireplaces, stoves, candles, and you'll also get formaldehyde and other things off furniture or carpets. And of course, pathogens can build up in those environments. And this is all very important because this toxic combination indoors from outdoor and indoor sources is really where we spend about 90% of our time. So it is important we tackle this problem. Which pollutant should I measure? This is actually a longer list than the one I presented or talked about in discussion in 2016. It is important to include particle numbers, I think, as well as particle mass concentrations, which are the WHO guidelines. And I will be very surprised if the new WHO guidelines do not include a particle mass concentration, the number of particles, for example, in a cubic centimeter. Carbon dioxide is really there because it's to do with your productivity and so on, and it gives a sense of how well ventilated a building is. Carbon monoxide, of course, and these other pollutants. I would also keep track of ozone levels. Some of the air treatment mechanisms can give off ozone, but I think more importantly, as we experience climate change, ozone levels in cities will rise quite a lot as oxides of nitrogen come down. And that's important because ozone is the most irritant gas for humans. And I mentioned just some other environmental metrics there, which I'm sure you're measuring humidity, temperature, and pressure. Worth keeping an eye also on things like sickness and productivity, because it may give you a sense of the fact that you're getting something back for the money you invest in energy and air quality. These are some of the things. I'm not going to read this list out. I've tried to put these slides together so they're a reference source for you afterwards. But what I'm just saying is that there are quite a lot of things that you need to think about when you're tackling indoor air quality. Perhaps the point 10 is the most important one, which is that I know many people on this at this conference will have been concerned for many years about energy, and that's very good with the climate change context around us. But we do need to walk and chew gum. We do need to think about energy, manage energy, and we also need to address indoor air quality. And as I say, if the World Health Organization guidelines are tightened substantially, possibly within 2 or 3 months, I think you're going to get a lot of coverage of that in the media, and I think you're going to get a lot of questions from people about what air pollution is like inside their buildings, because it's a way of protecting yourself from outside air pollution. Don't forget the new planning system. I've done my best to lobby on the London plan and give evidence at hearings and things. And there are actually 14 mentions of the importance of reducing people's exposure to air pollution in that London plan. So I think you'll find that developers and building occupiers will be keen to pay attention to this. And the Knightsbridge neighbourhood plan, I had a busy time between 2015 and 2019, as well as thankfully, Andrew, speaking at your conference. But I was the single first and only air pollution stakeholder on UN Environment's 6th Global Environment Outlook, advising the UN about air pollution for its assessment of the all aspects of the environment globally. But at the same time, I was chairman of the Knightsbridge Neighbourhood Forum, and with my air quality or clean air hat on, I asked or proposed this air quality policy. And I think that is important, because what it does say is, it goes back to that WHO guidance in 2018. We really ought to be aiming to achieve full compliance with WHO guidelines indoors as well as outdoors. There is some very good guidance out there. You'll see in a moment that I've separated out this between good guidance and standards. There is an increasing large amount of evidence from scientists, but also guidance from very well respected organizations such as ASHRAE, BISA, and of course the WHO. And I would point to the last one here. The WHO very recently, beginning of the month, produced a roadmap to improve and ensure good indoor air ventilation or air quality in the context of COVID. And of course, I see them as the most authoritative organization globally. I think those will be published in printed form shortly. So do look out for those. That's what this roadmap looks like, and some of the things that it said. Here's ASHRAE. As an American organization, you'll see lower down 2.2 highlighted in red. They refer to something called MERV 13, which is their standard, which I think is fairly outdated in my view. But the equivalent standard I've just put there is EPM1 at 80% efficiency. You might say minimum 60% efficiency, but really 80% efficiency to match MERV 13, I think. This is the other part of the equation. So we have guidance, which is important, but we also need standards, and the guidance is often built on these standards. But I highlight that point in italics just under the heading, which is that I've really been quite surprised that those who write guidance may not understand that buildings need ventilation, temperature control, and filtration or air treatment, because it's not just about ventilation, as those who are listening will, I'm sure, know extremely well. But they may also not understand the range of the latest standards. So here are 3 examples of the British and European and ISO standards. BSEN 16798-3 is an extremely important one. It underpins, or it's an umbrella over the following 2 I mentioned. And then there's the ASHRAE guidance down below, which goes back to 2012, but it's still good guidance. But I think they're updating that at the moment. Oh, I should have mentioned earlier, and I do apologize, but Camfil, I did put it on the front slide, but Camfil, who are one of the world leaders in air filters for buildings, have been the lead sponsor for Clean Air in London since 2011, so it's 10 years. I have no financial incentive to promote their products, but without their support over that time, I would not have learnt about and spoken about indoor air quality. So I'm very grateful to them, and I should disclose that. I did put it on the very front slide, but I did want to mention it as well. This slide is about COVID. COVID, the virus size is about 0.12 to 0.16 microns in diameter. But all the guidance and the science is basically saying that it is transmitted in the airborne transmission through droplets. And of course, those are much, much bigger, up to 10 microns in diameter. So we need to just remember that in terms of the problem that we're trying to tackle. I would also like to just point you to another common sense test, I would call it, in terms of what we need to do to improve air quality in buildings and tackle pathogens such as COVID, which is obviously a great concern. This is off a very old WHO guidance document for biosafety labs. And so I put that in there for amusement. But the point is that for decades, these biosafety labs have been using H14 as in Hotel 14, HEPA filters for decades. And that's because they remove virtually 100% of those airborne pathogens that they're concerned about. So if you really want to have the best possible air quality in buildings and maximum removal of COVID, just bear in mind you could always choose to have an H14 HEPA air filter. So it is about a spectrum up to that sort of standard, depending on what you want to set or your clients want to set. This is a helpful slide which Camfil have kindly let me use. But what it's talking about is that, for example, the HEPA standard, the 1822 standard, it defines what they call the maximum penetrating particle size, the penetration at that size. So it's that dip in that curve. The curve is obviously exaggerated because it's really only dropping to about 99.99%, but it's been shown at 50%. But it's dropping down to that level. And that's because you've got, with air filtration, you've got different ways. You've got diffusion, interception, sedimentation, and straining, and so on. You've got different ways of capturing particles. And they tackle particles at different sizes. And you get this sort of maximum penetrating particle size. And what we're talking about is removing well over 99%. If you look down at the table at the bottom, the H14, 99.995% efficiency. And that's because you get actually higher particle efficiency removals above and below that maximum penetrating particle size. Now this is a slide which, apologies if there are any errors in this. I hope people will write to me. You can contact me via the cleanair.london website. But what I've tried to do here is give a sense of some of the approaches that can be used to clean air indoors. And I've split it really between air cleaning or air filtration and aerial surface treatments. I think that's a fair way to do it. And what I'm highlighting here is the different processes which are used under these different methods. I've credited at the bottom this nifty sounding handbook called the Aero Biological Engineering Handbook. But one of the points here is that really I think the way in which you can ask about these standards is really what international, UK, EU or international standards do these different types of filter or treatment. How are they set? And what is the testing and the evidence for that? That is the critical way to look at these alternative technologies. This is, it looks a complicated slide, but again, it's for reference in future. I think what it gives you a sense of is the different amounts of air filtration, different qualities of air filtration, which is the column on the left. You can see that there are different types of particle filter, going up to the H14 I mentioned, which is of operating theatres or biosafety facilities. So it just gives you a sense of what standards might be used in different places, and there are examples of use there. Here, this is another way of looking at it. This is a slide similar to one I used in 2016. But what it's basically saying is, if you look at those outdoor air quality bits, so what is air quality like outside the building? And I've said you can find out that from a variety of sources. But, is it countryside, cleaner air or smaller towns, or is it sort of central London, some of the places where it's still breaching the World Health Organization guideline or legal limit? And then the supply air quality is basically saying, what sort of air quality do you want in the building? Do you want SUP4, which is fairly low air quality in the building, or do you want high air quality SUP1? And then it gives a sense of what sort of filters you need. And if you look at the bottom left there, what it's showing is you have something like an EPM1 70%, which will sort of stop some of the larger particles. GF is gas filtration, and then another PM filter 85% efficiency. These are some bits of guidance. The first two of these, I'm really quite appalled that they have not been updated. HTM03 was published 14 years ago, nearly 14 years ago, and it sets some air filtration standards for hospitals and healthcare facilities. And Clean Air in London's look at that found that air quality in hospitals, operating theatres can often have HEPA filters, as you saw from a previous slide. But indoor air quality in hospitals genuinely may be no better than warehouses, because they just use a dust filter, which is really pretty hopeless, just to keep out bumblebees and things. BB 101, astonishingly, this is the school's guidance. Again, it gets back to the point that the people who write this guidance really may not understand the application or the updating of the latest standards. So this one about indoor air quality in schools was referring to EN 13779, which had actually been withdrawn a month or two before this guidance was published. So it really is, I have written to them and pointed out, but it's pretty astonishing that that still has not been updated. The NICE guidance doesn't really mention air cleaning or air filtration very much. But in any event, all of this guidance plus other guidance will need to be updated, and the standards, when we get these new World Health Organization guidelines in the next few weeks. We can protect ourselves for 90% of the time. Or, we can give ourselves 90% protection for 90% of the time. I think this is a simple question to ask, or that you might be asked, which is, does my building include a ventilation system or standalone units which comply with BN EN 167983. I mentioned Camphil there, not to plug them, but because they are really, they do have a lot of guidance, and there's a great deal on their website. Just because it's COP26, and actually because this is my main focus this year, is that I think quite a lot is going to change apart from new World Health Organization guidelines, but there's quite a lot that's going to change over the next 5 or 10 or 15 years as we get more and more concerned about the impacts of climate change. Energy efficiency, we really will need to be going for all electric buildings. I'm quite convinced of that. There will be more and more concern about air pollution, because the more the scientists look, the more they find. Do remember about ozone, heat island effect, which means probably more air conditioning, and of course sealed buildings. And there will be vector-borne diseases. This is really where, as the climate warms, we will get some of the sort of tropical or subtropical diseases coming our way. But the thing which I'm often asked about, what am I most amazed about indoor air quality, and that's that really so few people seem to understand that it is not just all about ventilation. You do need to think about the heating or the cooling of the building, and of course the air treatment or the air filtration. These are just some final things which I would mention. I think, as well as the new WHO guidelines, there's a lot of pressure building up, positive pressure at the UN level for a universal right to a clean, a safe, clean, healthy and sustainable environment. And that was recently signed up to or called for by 60 countries and about 15 United Nations entities. I think that would be a great step forward, but what it will do is, of course, make people want to be protected indoors as well as outdoors. There's an interesting air quality expert group being put together, an ad hoc group on indoor air quality. You'll know from other sessions where I've spoken, for example, to BISA, that I would really like to see a new Clean Air Act. We need to decarbonize our buildings. We also need to update the current Clean Air Act. We need to set a deadline for the ending the sales of wood burners, solid fuel burners, and the use of those in cities, which is more or less what we did in 1956, but fine particles are now something like 38% of the emissions of PM 2.5 in the UK, according to DEFRA. Do watch out for the Climate Change Conference, and on that on that new Clean Air Act, I would like to say that the versions which I've produced with Clean Air in London's lawyers, both of them asked to have indoor air included in that act. And what it does is it basically says that where health and safety executive or health and safety rules apply, people should pay attention to air quality and use the health guidance that's available. That's it for the moment from me. I'd be very pleased to take questions, and I hope I'm on time, Andrew.
You are certainly on time, Simon. So well done for that. That's first tick in the box. I'm waiting for audience questions. This is always what happens. I panic that there's no audience questions and they start flooding in just as I'm starting talking. So forgive me in a second or two as I try and do two things at once, walk and chew gum, to use your phrase. But I wanted to open really with a general question, and that's we haven't seen each other for 4.5 years. Do you feel more optimistic than you did then? I'm particularly interested. Clearly, COVID has had a massive impact on everybody's attitude to air quality. The medical side aside, has it been a distraction from what you've been trying to do, or has it actually focused everybody in the right direction?
Well, I think I'm very optimistic. I'm optimistic as a person, but I think the reasons I am optimistic generally, and then let me talk about COVID, is that actually last year there were only about 10 places in London, for example, which is the most polluted in the UK, down to about 10 roads in London, which are exceeding the nitrogen dioxide annual average limit. And that's a phenomenal improvement from where I started 15 years ago, where air pollution was 3 times that same limit. So it has come down dramatically. There's an awful lot of attention, a lot of understanding, I think, about air pollution these days. So that's part of why I'm optimistic. The other part is that there is so much focus these days on net zero. And to me, the sort of unifying theory between climate change and air quality, sort of sitting when I was writing the Knightsbridge neighbourhood plan and things, trying to work out how to tackle these problems, is about zero air emissions from buildings. And so the massive government focus, international focus on net zero, to me is really the main game in town. I absolutely don't forget indoor air, because that's what keeps us healthy day to day. But the drive to net zero is going to have a massive improvement, or give us a massive improvement. And I think what has happened with COVID-19 is it has made people think further, not just about the sort of the airborne transmission type aspects of pathogens, but we've seen lockdown, and we saw huge reductions, sort of 2/3 reductions in nitrogen dioxide levels. Guess what? From fewer diesel vehicles on the street. But what was surprising was that particle levels didn't fall even during those lockdowns, because they can come from many sources, including agriculture, so on. And the other thing is that ozone levels actually went up. And that's what happens when these diesel fumes go down in the short to medium term. So I am optimistic, because the current guidelines are being met. We are heading to net zero, I think, quite fast. And also people have looked not just at the airborne transmission, but the solutions that we can have in cities to sort of re-engineer them in a very positive way. So I see an opportunity here as much as anything else.
And do you think in my very cleverly couched question, the follow-up was going to be, do you think the public care more? And then do you think authorities care more than they did 5 years ago?
Well, I think that the public does care. Air pollution has been a big issue at the mayoral elections, really, even since 2008. It was on the front page of the London Evening Standard in 2016. There's been special BBC items about it already. We've got these clean air zones. Bath has introduced a clean air zone. Other cities are following. I think maybe they were waiting for somewhere outside London to do it, but Manchester and Birmingham, I think, may follow. So I think there is a very much wider understanding. Just about every day on the BBC, you see a story somewhere on their website about air pollution. So I think that is there. I think the governments, I've been very rude over the years about DEFRA since 2011. They have not sent a press release to environmental journalists or weather forecasters to warn them about an air pollution episode. And we have several of these episodes a year. In 2011, April 2011, they sent one out to those people, and their website, their page had about 5,000 hits. and I did 6 TV interviews in 24 hours, and they didn't seem to like it. So now they just sort of bury it, and it has about 500 hits hidden away on one of their websites. I think what they should do is really what the Mayor of London has done. I've been critical of him in some ways, but actually I gave him an A- for his achievement in improving air quality in London over the last 5 years. Because what he's done, he's wonderfully put me out of business. You know, he starts every sentence about air pollution as by saying London's air is toxic and killing people, which is what I used to say, an ambush, you know, Boris or others.
Yeah.
So by doing that, I think you really get control of the story as a mayor or a politician, because you're then just arguing about how far or fast you're going, and politicians are very comfortable doing that. So I would really encourage DEFRA to be bold and get through, start telling us what it really does mean to have this air pollution around. And then I think they can just start taking some action, because we have in London, for example, made the political costs of inaction greater than action, which is why we're seeing these restrictions on diesel vehicles.
Do you think I was just thinking you could maybe just change the name to Clean Air in England, but that might be a bit of a land grab. Do you think that COP26 and Glasgow is going to focus the country's minds on things like clean air? I mean, is this a great opportunity to, as you say, to unify the various strands?
Yeah. Well, the what I've done is there's a sort of a social media aggregator thing that's called Sprout Social, and I've analysed. There've been about 6 million tweets globally, and you'll understand why I'm saying this in a moment. About 6 million tweets globally over the last 12 months, which have mentioned either air pollution or COP26, the climate change conference. And about 25 million engagements, which is where people like it or share it or something. What is staggering to me is that I identified 20 themes, such as sort of justice or cities or health, and I looked at, analysed all those tweets, and what I found was that for the 4.5 million tweets about air pollution, COP26 is the last of 20 categories that's being mentioned. And similarly, on the COP tweets, air pollution is the last. And so given that 80% of the sources of air pollution and climate change are the same, I think it's really important that all of us who are interested in air should be mentioning cities, health, justice, air pollution in relation to COP26, because it does matter. If we drive down to net zero, I think it's going to give us much cleaner air in our cities and towns.
Great, thanks. So we've got 2 more minutes left, and I've got one specific question and then one general question to try and seeg into the next session. So here's the specific question, bear with. So for COVID, the best possible indoor mitigation is thought to be the elimination of the virus at the source of emissions. So therefore, filtration and UV processes are not going to actually do that at the source, which explains, says the question of why the R rate keeps jumping when we stop lockdowns. What's your opinion of how to address this?
Well, I think when I think of addressing COVID at the source, what I mean is, testing people, not letting them into the building in the first place. It's a bit like pilots saying we don't want hijackers in the plane. Having a strong door doesn't really, it's not the key. We want to keep people out of those environments. So that's the most important thing. I think the other thing to bear in mind is that actually, if you do have a well-run building or a mixture with standalone units, let's say, there are 5 air changes an hour, 20% of the air comes in from outside and the rest is recirculated. Now, every time the air goes through air cleaning, air filtration, it will remove 80% of what's in the air. And so you end up really, after a few circulations, with something which is approaching the sort of the cleanliness that you get from one HEPA filter. So actually, we can make our havens, even from COVID, and some very clever things can be done in terms of, if you've got dance floors or something, you can actually sort of suck air up or down to move it away from the people. So I think it does require walking, chewing gum, and maybe a bit of singing. But I think there's a lot we can do. But let's keep infected people out of our buildings.
Thanks. So the general question was really to tie it all up. So the industry has been very involved so far in the fight against COVID. What do you think is the best way for the industry to move forward? It's a complicated area, IAQ. Working with you, working with other campaigners, working with policymakers, what's the next best step?
To me, the most important thing is to make sure that the guidance covers filtration, covers covers ventilation. The most important thing is we need guidance which covers ventilation, air conditioning, and filtration. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, and that includes whether it's from the scientists or well-respected organizations like BESA or ASHRAE. And the second thing we need is to make sure that that guidance is updated for the latest UK international standards, such as 16798. I think those things are important, because if we have that, then clients will understand, it will make it easy for facilities managers, and it will give a lot of reassurance to the occupants of buildings. So let's bear in mind we've got these different problems to tackle, plus energy, of course. But if we have the latest standards applied in those, I think we'll be a long way down the track.
Fantastic. Well, it's good to have you back in the fold again, Simon. Good to
Thanks,
see you.
Andrew.
Thank you for your input as ever. We'll be sharing your links and sharing your slides, and hopefully we might be able to tap you up for an article at some point. I'm just throwing that in, keeping you off guard. Without further ado, as I see my colleague Neil has already hoved into view, we'll move on to the next session. So thanks very much, Simon.
Thanks, Andrew.
That. So over to you, Deputy Neil, to talk about IAQ in schools, and I will fade away.
Okay, thanks, Andrew and Simon. Of course, we'll be moving on nicely, segueing, I hope, into our next session, which is looking at the issue of safe schools, which is a nice and generic term for what I think we'll find is quite a complex issue there. In particular, we're going to be looking at the roles of technology solutions and sensors, obviously, and ultimately perhaps standards in how we're going to achieve this. I'm delighted to say I won't be doing this alone. I'm very pleased to be joined by an expert panel today to look exactly how we make our schools safe in regards, obviously, to the current issues with COVID, but perhaps sort of the longer standing issues around health and well-being that I know we've been discussing by the magazine and via the channels about how an issue this is. So I'd like to welcome Nathan Wood, who's the Managing Director of Farnwood, Gary Ratcliffe, the CEO of the Galaxy Trust, and Jackie Price of Lineker as well for joining us. So thanks, guys. So, as I said, it's quite a broad social subject, so I thought I'd start out with asking all of you, really, with respect to building controls, ventilation, and standards, what realistically should we classify as a safe school? Is there a simple way of answering that one? I'll leave that to you.
Nathan, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Neil. A safe school. My son's school's not safe. Please don't do your research and work out which school it is, because he's currently off with a positive case. But certainly before the pandemic, I feel that schools weren't safe. Majority of schools weren't safe in terms of good IAQ. The risk of COVID has highlighted the issue, and I'm hoping that it's not going to go away anytime soon. So it is really putting a lot of focus and a lot of pressure, and I'm pleased that Gary's on with us today to talk about the pressures on schools, but then Jackie more so as well to talk about the pressures on the kids and their mental health. So there's a lot more to it than just the COVID risk. But in terms of what is a safe school, I've got my ideas, but I think the discussion is to work that through, and I think Gary's probably the best placed person to.
I think one of my most vivid memories of walking the corridors of my schools is a wet Wednesday afternoon, and you walk into a year 5 classroom that just had PE, and the smell and the humidity and the general fog in the room sort of just hits you in the face, right? And clearly that's not a safe school in terms of air quality. We've come a bit further than that, I guess, in that you know, we do have open windows now in most of my schools, but you know, I think we're in an interesting position that one of my schools, Temple Hill, has just expanded. So it's had a new build of 7 new classrooms. And those 7 new classrooms have some sort of air conditioning within each of the classrooms so that they're cool in the summer and warm in the winter. But you walk down the next corridor and windows in the classrooms don't even open. So there's a real contrast now between the type of school that children and young people are in and the amount of investment that's been put into that school, I think.
Lovely. It was, I mean, I guess we're looking at the broader issues there with what we're facing. But I guess I know it's that broad issue again, Jackie, but perceptions of safe schools, I guess. How would you say that in terms of classifying it? Has that changed in terms of what a safe school is, or is it still the same issue when it comes to that we're facing post pre-COVID as well, about what we should be classing as a safe school, would you say?
I think COVID has highlighted the fact that we've got issues in schools in a different way, perhaps. I think it's really interesting if you look at the instances of increases in asthma attacks when we go back to school at the beginning of the school year. It's quite marked. If you look at the amount of viral infections that are transferred within the schools when children go back to school in September, it's a really good marker for the fact that perhaps we still haven't got where we need to be. I also think that if you're looking at improving the air quality, well, something really important to consider is how does that impact on the wider population? So in terms of children taking those illnesses, spreading them outside of the school, the impact that has on the health service and people in working environments, I think it's quite a big subject that we're just tapping into. And for me, I think that IAQ needs to have a higher profile within the safeguarding policies.
I mean, it's coming on and on that idea of profile there. Wanted to raise with you all the occasional, as I'm sure we all have watched a few of the government briefings of late, but specifically there was a very interesting one when we were first talking in late February about opening businesses up, mainly opening schools up as the first step, but opening things up. And we had Patrick Valence, the Chief Scientific Officer, specifically citing good ventilation is the exact term, as being essential to the safe reopening of schools. So I was going to start with Nathan, obviously, and come around to you all, but as an extension of that, I mean, how, as an industry, and I guess more importantly, as education providers as well, are we able to provide good ventilation right now? What does that look like? Is it realistically opening the windows? And how do we look at this on a mass scale when, as Gary's pointed out, there's such a difference, I guess, between different schools. Even the same education provider has different estates and different challenges there.
Well, I think it's really interesting that the Department for Education have actually inspected, I think, all of the schools in the UK, but yet they won't publish the results on their findings. I'm not being clever with that. I read that on Twitter. Twitter doesn't lie. But I have looked into that, and it's true. They're saying that it goes against competitive edge when they're tendering for these projects. But they're telling us to ventilate our schools. They know the conditions of the schools and those that haven't got ventilation, yet they're doing nothing about it, very little about it. So they're telling us to ventilate. They're giving us all of this amazing guidance, and Gary's being told what to do with his schools, and he hasn't got the budget to do this with his schools. And as a ventilation company, you know, we're looking at different ways that we can support our local schools that we've never had any involvement with. So we've been sharing with them the BISA guidance that has been put together. And they've come back to us and just said, you know, why haven't we had this before? So some schools are very engaging. Other schools are very much, thank you very much, we're dealing with this, leave us be sort of thing. But when the call for ventilators came out, you know, when they couldn't get enough ventilators made, and I think Dyson stepped forward and started making them, friends and family and people that knew us as a ventilation company were contacting us to ask if we were making them. And I said, well, that's a completely different type of ventilation. So that just goes to show the general public's idea of what ventilation is.
There's, in preparation for our discussion, I just pulled up some figures because I wanted to give a real context to our primary schools. Okay, we're in leafy Dartford, right by the tunnel, and I've got 4 primary schools. And I asked my business team some questions, and one of them was, how much do we get to spend on capital projects each year? So within the budget, the DFE gives you money for the children and money for the buildings. And last year, Oakfield, which is a school of 650 children, got £12,000 the entire year for capital spend. How much did we spend on resources? For the whole year, West Hill, which is another school within my trust, it's got 580 kids. We had a total of £24,000 to spend on all the resources for the school for the whole year. There is a fund that we can bid for money from. It's called the Condition Improvement Fund. And we did some fire compliance projects at West Hill and at Temple Hill over the last couple of years. Now for that, West Hill received 868,000 and Temple Hill received 486,000. But they are projects for really specific purposes. And I read the guidance for that as well today in preparation for this. And it says really clearly, the funding is to keep education provider buildings safe and in good working order, okay? And their definition of safe is to address health and safety issues, building compliance and poor building condition. And it then goes on to say that the Condition Improvement Fund will largely only cover boilers and electrics, fire doors and alarms, roofs and windows, and asbestos removal. And that's it.
So a few specifics, but the wider issues again. I mean, is there a little bit of this again? Almost it comes down. Nathan, you were saying that there's almost a bit of a good Samaritans here. I was kind of the idea of where do we need perhaps leadership on in some senses? Does government need to be more active, or is it assisting schools themselves to be able to deal with this? That doesn't, from what you're saying, there's obviously a variation we have here in individual schools in what they can provide. But I was wondering where when it comes to this idea of good ventilation, is it Samaritans, Nathan, that we need? And
well, Samaritans are good in the short term, but in the bigger picture, I mean, I'm working on a project with Gary at these schools. But the whole idea behind the project is to make it so then it can be mainstream led. Anybody can take it on. Everybody. There's no point things being sponsored. It's great. It gives people a profile. It makes, you know, it gives you that great altruistic feeling of helping people out, and it supports the school. But what about the one down the road? What about the class around the corner? So yes, sponsoring things, and companies are raising their profile. And some companies are doing a hell of a lot of good things. So there does need to be a bit of a shout out. I've given the ventilation industry a bit of a bad rep over the years, especially at the last 2019 national conference with BISA. But I am seeing collaboration. I am seeing new ideas beyond compliance. But taking a step back, the Health and Safety at Work Act requires employers must deliver adequate ventilation and good indoor air quality in buildings. That's not changed since COVID times. So it's your employer's duty to ensure that you have adequate ventilation in your building, whether that be mechanical or natural. But I think from listening to the experts, such as Professor Kathy Noakes, you know, there's no, just cracking a window does not guarantee adequate ventilation within a room, even though the lovely ad on the TV shows the workman coming into that person's home and the particles float lovely out the window. So it is down to duty of care, and for people to meet their duty of care, they need guidance. And yes, BESA have done some great stuff, SIBSI have done stuff, REVA and everything else. But as an industry, we know that for people like Gary and my local schools and nurseries and other buildings, unfortunately, a lot of them are just talking to people that are cold calling them, businesses trying to sell, you know, a silver bullet in terms of air purifiers or systems and technologies and all sorts of weird and wonderful ideas. And just looking on social media, there's been millions spent in the States, millions and millions of pounds on clean air technology. And there's been no overall improvement with those that have been monitored. You know, and the government has spent billions on PPE, some of which we haven't been able to use. The Department for Education aren't publishing guidance on the condition of buildings that they know about, even because of their competitive edge. But when it comes to the PPE, they spent £250 million with a jewellery company because it didn't have to go out to an open tender. So I don't see what they're trying to safeguard by not issuing this information about the condition of the schools in the UK. When they want PPE, they can just put out a tender to anybody, which 250 million apparently went to a jeweller's. So I know you like this sort of thing, Neil, but it's very much a bitter taste in the mouth when you've got schools that are closing, classrooms that are closing on a daily basis, and yet every bit of guidance coming from all four corners says you need to improve your ventilation. Without question, hand space, and ventilate. But schools and businesses just need clear-cut, accurate guidance, which is everywhere, but it's just taking that to an understandable level that, one, they can afford, two, that works, and the longevity of it as well, maintaining these systems. You know, we just heard Simon talking about HEPA filters and all these different clean air technologies. How much is, you know, if the school can afford them now, how much is it going to cost them in 6 months' time, and they need to change out a load of HEPA filters or UV tubes or whatever else? So there's a lot more to it than just the immediate effect.
I think schools are more complex organisations, obviously, and the younger the child, in my opinion, it becomes more complex as well. Going back to what Jackie was saying about the rise in, you know, the viral infections at the beginning of the year. You know, one thing, I'm sure many of you on the call today have children or young children. They lick everything. You know, they have hands in their mouth. They have, you know, no personal space. So that is an added pressure that primary schools are certainly facing. You know, by the time you get into secondary schools, yes, they may be really good at social distancing, but they also like kissing a hell of a lot. So, you know, there's going to be all of that going on as well. But for me, the solution within our schools, within our primary schools, and this led on from a conversation I had with Nathan just last week, was about a more holistic approach to the issue of air quality, full stop. So we know we haven't got 500,000 to put in, you know, an all singing, all dancing system within our school. There's just not the money, you know, and that's the way it is. But Nathan asked me about whether we had a program in place for idle parking outside of the school, you know, whether we'd actually launched a really good walking to school program, all of those sort of things, you know, in improving the outside air quality for our pupils, which, you know, will in turn raise awareness for air quality in general. So, you know, teachers that maybe are more worried about being warm than having you know, fresh air within their classrooms, for example. So a number of classrooms I walk into where the windows are closed because the teacher's a cold one and never has the windows open, you know. So you know, it's a really complex issue that isn't just about the system within the classroom, and we've got to put the age of the child into the context of that as well, I think. And you know, I think schools are, the NHS is on a whole new level, of course, but schools have been up against it for a year, you know, trying to work from home, trying to do remote learning, trying to keep key workers and vulnerable kids in school. Also, you know, suffering in terms of losing members of staff. We had 6 members of staff in the hospital at one point within my trust. And there's all sorts of things going on. And if you ask a head teacher who's under pressure at the moment about air quality, it is not going to be the top of their list. So We need people who are going to make it easier for us to understand the benefits and our responsibilities, I think.
It's interesting. I know when we were discussing the structure of this panel more recently, and we mentioned about, and it wasn't just yourself as experts, so I know other people had talked about the hope for a semi-decent summer beyond it being a summer, but in terms of actually the window opening and supporting schools to at least have some sort of natural ventilation there. I mean, in an ideal world, say, where we perhaps get a nice summer and we can have, where in obviously schoolrooms where windows do actually open, which is a challenge in itself, but we've got those open. In the longer term, by autumn, by winter, what do you think we need to see in terms of a strategy wise, or perhaps is the approach beyond the think of an idealized summer of some nice weather where we can have windows open? By the point of coming out of that, though, where do we need to be in terms of having strategy? Perhaps is it new guidance? Is it more funding there? I mean, what would be a more ideal situation, say, to be heading into autumn and winter for? Granted, I know we may have the vaccinations as well, but in terms of actually looking at our school buildings and what they're doing with the air that's coming in.
November last year, when schools were still open, I think they were open in November. I think they were. I remember sending a letter home, and my colleagues up and down the country would have sent exactly the same letter home, telling parents to send their children in with another hoodie or another jumper, because the windows were still going to be open, and it's going to be cold. Imagine a situation where we're asking, say, 10-year-olds to work, at their desk for, hours at a time and being cold. I wouldn't do it, but we're expecting our children to do it because we see that the ventilation aspect of keeping children safe in school is really important. And the payoff for that is actually wearing another jumper or your coat in class. I don't know where you'd go after that, So the benefit of working in primary school is absolutely from April onwards, April till July, and then definitely in September, more lessons outside. All of your sport happens outside. The doors and windows are open. We go to summer uniform. Everyone's happy. It's a brighter mood. By the middle of October, it's just the same, but with grey clouds. So, we're encouraging, just as we do with our earliest children, our earliest children have 50% of their learning outside all year round, or they should do. And similarly, as we enter the COVID scenario, more PE is happening outside, more games are happening outside, whether it's raining, whether it's snowing or not, because we know that's safer for the children. So in terms of the day-to-day operation of the school, there's no difference between summer or winter, apart from you may have to put another coat on.
Brings me back some memories of school in those times. So I guess moving on and coming to the panel at large there. So to ensure we have, I've got here that monitored, managed, and effective air quality, environmental controls, and a bit more of that holistic approach to health and well-being there. I'm going to ask the question about funding, the dreaded question, but how is that, and I guess this is to start with you, Gary, there, but how is that funding being made available to schools to ensure they have kit and expertise required? And has that really changed with the COVID reality? And as you said, some of the realities we've seen in the last year now, is that beginning to, has there been a shift, a kind of reaction, at least, that's the kind of situation that you are dealing with?
No, well, I guess you can split school funding into several pots. Okay, so the first pot will be your general school allowance, which is based on the number of children you have in your school. So that is standard year on year, and for primary schools, that in September will be £4,000 per pupil. Okay, and that's it. So you get your money, and that's where you pay your staffing and you buy your resources, and then you might get a bit of capital funding on top of that. Then there is the 1.8 billion that's spoken about all the time about this new government funding that's coming in. And I think some just from picking up, listening to some of you guys speak, that there's an assumption that some of that 1.8 billion could be used for air quality improvement. Of that 1.8 billion, $1 billion of that is already earmarked to rebuild 50 schools over the next 10 years. 560 million of it is for refurbishment, and 200 million is for refurbing colleges. So that's that 1.8 billion gone. Then we've got the condition improvement funding that we can apply for as academies, but I've already read out the criteria for that. And then the last sort of pot of money is this sort of COVID response fund. But for that, we are talking about, you know, a fairly limited amount of money being spread across thousands of schools in the UK to cover the cost really of a part-time cleaner, or maybe to cover some supply costs if there are a significant number of teachers away from school. But it's certainly not a longer term investment plan. It's reactive, and it's to keep schools and trusts head above water. So, for example, we looked into this actually. So we've had significant absence in our trust with people having COVID, but you can only apply for the government fund to get the money that you need to replace the staff if more than 10% of your entire teaching team are off on long-term sick, or more than 20% of your entire teaching team are off on short-term sick. So that's quite a large number of staff that you have to have off to even be able to access that fund. We can only apply for additional cleaning costs if we've had to employ additional cleaners or cleaning hours as a direct result of having to either close the school or close a bubble because of a COVID positive result. So there's all these sorts of criteria and stipulations that put on us to be able to claim that money. We, up until, what month are we in now? March. Up until the end of January, I think we'd spent £160,000 across the trust on additional cleaning, signage, PPE, perspex screens, you know, 160 grand. Now, bear in mind that last year it was £24,000 that one school spent on resources for the entire year. You know, that's a lot of money. And of that, we will get about 55,000 back. But we're still 100,000 down. Now, I'd love for you to be able to tell me there's a magic pot somewhere that I haven't found that, you know, that could actually pay for some of this work to happen, but I can't see it.
I mean, that's the thing. I think it's very common politics-wise to talk about the money that's being invested in problems, but it's interesting when you actually come down to how is that dispersed? What does that, you know, they're large, almost intangible sums, but actually when it comes down to the individual need for them, seeing with many things, Green Homes Grant as well, that becomes a bit more complicated then about how, as you said, how that's coming out and what exactly that's directly addressing.
Yeah, I mean, the Condition Improvement Fund really is a genuine good fund that, you know, if you put in a good bid and you can prove your case that you can get some significant work done in the school. So, you know, here I'm looking at my door now. It's a beautiful door. It's a fireproof door. We've had fire compliance right the way through the school, and it was hundreds, you know, it was hundreds of thousands. West Hill, £868,000 was spent on fire compliance. Now, there's nothing to stop us actually using one of our schools maybe as a case study to say, right, you know, we believe that air quality is, you know, really important in terms of children's health, staff health, and health and safety wise, and see if we can tap into that condition improvement fund under the health and safety arm of that. But you'd have to put a really very, very strong bid in when you're bidding for a big pot of money directly against competition within other schools that really want a leaky roof fixed. And that's what it comes down to, I think.
Yeah, I guess it's that different needs of different estates. It's still not necessarily getting to that more uniform approach we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And there's a slight extension that I was going to ask Jackie and Nathan as well. In terms of where we are with the challenges we face and a bit more of an understanding of COVID and kind of what we need in buildings. I was wondering, particularly from a school and education side, how it's changed from the business end, from suppliers, in terms of what you're being asked, or the sort of services or the queries you're getting. How is that? How are you seeing that change in terms of what you're being asked to do or required? Is that being drawn out in what schools might be coming to yourselves and asking for in terms of support, in terms of guidance, in terms of sort of dealing with some of these quite unique challenges that they may have for their estate?
Thank you, Jackie.
Sorry, you want me to take? I think for me, I think it's still about educating people. I think we need to raise awareness. I don't think there's enough education out there, and I think all of the work that Bees is doing is helping to raise the profile of awareness. But it's limited in terms of what we're experiencing. And from a workplace point of view, people are very aware of making sure the windows are open, even to the point where we have particular plants that we know are really good for the air. Whether it's chrysanthemums or peace lilies, all those kinds of things that people do when they take a little bit of responsibility for themselves. But I think until we raise that awareness and help people understand why they need to make these changes and what the potential return on investment can be in terms of attendances and less drawing on services, I don't think we're going to see the change that we need to make happen. I don't know if you agree, Nathan.
Totally. I mean, it's as Simon was saying, DEFRA have got all of these air quality monitoring stations dotted all around the place. But I mean, there's even one near us, near our office in Sittingbourne, and I've got quite an interest in this. We log into it quite a lot, and they don't do anything with the data. They publish it on a website. It's not advertised. Nobody knows that the monitoring station's there. And there's so many schools, and even newer schools and planning permission that's going in, where they're in an air quality management area with a DEFRA approved station, but the awareness isn't there. And I do feel that air quality could be a fantastic new addition to the curriculum, and it covers so many different aspects of children's learning all the way through. I mean, I wouldn't have the first clue on a learner's journey to become a virologist. My path was engineering, so that's just a completely different sort of area to myself. But I'm finding the need for the engineering services to understand air quality, and it's not easy. It really isn't easy. You can put an air quality monitor in a classroom, you can give an amazing speech to the children, and you can run through everything. You can get the parents involved, you can get the school really excited about it, and your data might be corrupt. It might not give any value to what's there. There's so much more to air quality monitors, to ventilation, and going back to the question is, we directly look after 17 schools for a major company in the UK that looks after many, many more than that. And not once have they picked up the phone to ask us what they should be doing. Now, we've pitched to them many, many times what we think they should be doing, and we're here if they need us, and free advice and webinars and everything else. But because, as Gary's explaining, they haven't got the budget for it, what's the return on investment for them? But at the end of the day, we need our schools to be open for our children, for the next generation. But there's a massive thing with mental health, and I've got a 10-year-old boy and a 5-year-old boy. 10-year-old just about to move schools, and their mental health has suffered massively. It really has. And I think above all of this, knowing that indoor air quality has a massive effect on our health and well-being in general, it also has a massive effect on children's on their mental health. So I mean, air quality affects your mood, it affects everything. So if we can address COVID and address good ventilation in schools, the long-term impact for the generation now and forthcoming generations will just be immense. It really will.
It's fundamental that it's part of safeguarding, that the actual statement says preventing, impairment of children's health or development. And I think air quality plays such a huge part of that. It's something that we need to raise the focus of. And if that means we need to lobby for more funding for the schools, then I think we all need to take a little bit of responsibility and get behind it and do exactly that.
That's interesting. You've got some on sensitive, but some of the questions coming through from the audience, but it's specifically building on that for Gary as we're drawing a bit to the end there. But some questions really asking you in general, what your advice would be for specialist technology providers, solutions providers, in terms of engaging with schools in general. As soon as point out, you probably don't want cold calls, and probably schools aren't perhaps able to deal with just getting those calls there. So I think that the interesting question about what engagement, what would that usefully look like for you there?
Well, I think Nathan sort of started talking about curriculum, and we are at a turning point in terms of curriculum development, I think, and there will be a real focus over the next few years on mental health and on looking after ourselves, and climate change. And why air quality can't be part of that, I don't know. I think part of it comes down to individual teacher interest or passion. But our children, young people, they want to be part of this. And if they see air quality as part of the same agenda as climate change, for example, then I think you've got a really good way in to actually start engaging with the children, young people. I think there's a real difference between education and sales, and on the individual school level, it is going to be about education, but it's going to be about a collective voice, I think, as Jackie was sort of saying in terms of safeguarding, the lobbying for that additional funding, and putting pressure on through data and through facts that the government would need to invest more fully, because a school just does not have the capacity to do that as a standalone. We could have 10 summer fairs and still maybe would buy one unit for one classroom, where we are talking about significant investment for the thousands of schools up and down the country. So for individual companies, I think there is almost a moral responsibility to link up, to reach out to your local schools, or go online and find your 5 most deprived schools within your local area, to start that partnership around education. Because whilst I love a freebie, I also am in education because I'm passionate about our children who are going to be the adults of tomorrow, learning what they need to learn about. So that would be my plea to every company to start reaching out and to be educating.
I think that's interesting. I mean, probably as a finishing point, coming on to some of the audience questions, there's been a bit, Nathan, for yourself about EAC and other technologies and their use and proving it. But there's probably an interesting point, as you were just saying, Gary, about a bit of data, and Jackie's point about understanding as well, because actually, I guess in some senses, there's almost that kind of hope for a more simplified magic solution to some of these issues, to air quality. But we have different technologies coming through. The understanding, I guess, of what a school's needs are is a bit harder to understand in terms of where specific tech that may be used with other solutions there. So I guess some of that as well is from that technology side, Nathan. Is standards and guidance, is that an area that perhaps change?
We need the sector as a whole. We need much better control and standards and regulations in order, because it makes it a fair playing field. So you've got needle ionisation, ionisers, UV, HEPA, all of this crazy and wonderful stuff. Different manufacturers use it in different ways. They showcase their data in so many different ways. You can make data look better. You've only got to look on TV at these adverts where they don't say, like, out of 100 women, sorry, Jackie, with the women thing, I'm thinking about beauty products. They don't say out of 100 women, 70% found better things. It's always an anomaly of numbers, like 862 found that 60% done whatever. And that's what manufacturers do. They manipulate the numbers to generate the sale. There are some fantastic products on the market, but my guidance would be keep it simple. Space, face, ventilate. Sorry, face, space. Oh, I've got it. Hands, face, space, ventilate.
The
And
right.
if you haven't got the option for ventilation or opening up your windows, you do need to look to air purifiers or clean air tech. I'm a huge advocate for them. They do work when they're properly designed and properly used.
And do you know what I'd love to see? I'd love to see something in partnership with that around helping people change behaviour. Simple things like in schools. I remember going to school, having to take my shoes off and put my plimp soles on. Something simple like changing your shoes can have an impact on the quality of the air in the room around you. I'd love to see something in partnership with these companies where we can actually influence people's behaviour.
Well, I've plenty more questions, but I'm afraid actually that has brought us to the end though. It's time. These things do go. But thank you so much. I think that's always opens up so many more questions to get. But unfortunately, that's probably where we're finishing up. So at least some good guidance coming off there. So Gary, Jackie, and Nathan, thanks again so much for your time on that one.
No worries.
Thank you.
In a smooth handover, as the former panelists disappear from view, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to one of our technology specialists. It's Mick Langford of Panasonic, and he's going to tell us about some of the technology involved in improving IAQ. So Mick, are you there and ready to go? You just need to come off mute. There you go.
How you doing?
Good, thanks. Right, so I'm just going to disappear again and leave the floor to you, and then I'll pop back for some questions.
Okay, great, no problem. So as I was saying, this is an abridged version of a much longer indoor air quality presentation we do, almost as long actually because of the delay. So again, apologies. So what I'd like to say to you is if you have, anybody has any requirements for that CPD presentation or any other presentations that we do, just let us know, contact us through the website and we'd be happy to do that. So anyway, if we think about where we are with workspaces at the moment, I think as was mentioned before with the previous discussions, there's a huge number of workspaces that need heating and cooling and ventilation. And there's going to be all sorts of challenges in trying to achieve that. We're not going to be able to knock everything down and rebuild it. So added to that as well, there's an awful lot of technology in buildings, a lot of terminal units. There's a lot of equipment that's existing, a lot of older equipment that needs replacing. So there are some big constraints and some big challenges there. And many employees and that when they return to work will be obviously apprehensive and a little nervous. And in that respect, we need to make sure that we do everything we can to improve environments and make improve air quality as much as possible. So if we think a bit about, we think about air quality as a whole, we all know there's an awful lot of focus on outdoor air pollution and air quality generally. And the pandemic, we all know, has brought that into sharp focus, particularly when we talk about indoor air quality. And it's fair to say that I was quite surprised when I looked at this, actually, that there's a huge amount of our time is spent indoors, and it can be up to 90% of our time indoors. And I think there's a saying that goes that you are what you eat, you are what you drink. And for that matter, I'd like to add another, which is you are what you breathe. And on this slide here, what we're showing is that generally speaking, with we eat around about 1.3 kilos of food a day. We drink about 1.2 kilos in liquids, but we breathe in 18 kilos of air a day. So that's a huge amount of air. And so it's really important that we do everything we can to get that air quality right, and that people feel that the air they're breathing in those spaces is clean and of the right quality. When we talk about pathogens, and in particular viruses, obviously COVID-19, which is uppermost in all our minds, there are many common infections that are spread by airborne transmission, and at least in some cases, including things like measles and chickenpox, the flu virus, etc., and of course coronavirus. Many of these are highly contagious, and it's worth noting though that we've had pandemics throughout our recent history. Actually, if you look at this, we had the one that most people would be familiar with would be Spanish flu, which, depending on which data you look at, killed around 200,000 people back in the early 19th century, and then we've had other things, more recently. So in 57, 58, Asian flu, Hong Kong flu in 68, 69, swine flu, which never really got going, thankfully, and obviously coronavirus, where we're looking at 126,000 deaths so far. Now, airborne transmission, it relies on pathogens' ability to survive the aerosol transport, so as they transport between hosts. So understanding the parameters that determine the survival of those pathogens is really important in mitigating the circumstances and the impact that those diseases have in a workspace, or any space for that matter. So that's really what Panasonic have tried to do, and we've looked at technologies to tackle this as a whole. I thought we'd take a little look at bacteria and viruses, because obviously that's particularly viruses is the topic of the moment. If we look at both of those, we know both things cause diseases, quite serious diseases, but they have very different characteristics. You'll have heard mention of both DNA and RNA in discussions you'll have seen on the TV and all that sort of thing, with epidemiologists and the like. But DNA is a double-stranded molecule, whilst RNA is a single-stranded molecule. So looking at bacteria first, they have a cell structure, and they both have DNA and RNA, and they grow by themselves, multiplying quite rapidly, actually, generally speaking, within a host to overwhelm the body's defenses, basically by force of numbers. Viruses, on the other hand, operate quite differently. They have either DNA or RNA, so one or the other, as indicated on the slides here. Now, DNA viruses are far more robust, and they don't break down quite so easily. But they also multiply at a much slower speed. RNA viruses are much more fragile, and they break down far more easily, but they multiply much faster. So when you look at that in the whole, viruses, any sort of virus it behaves differently to bacteria. So they rely on invading a cell, and then using that cell to multiply and invade other cells, and that's how they spread through the body. And the slide here shows the 4 groups that we categorize viruses. So as I say, they either have you either have DNA viruses with an envelope, or without an envelope, or RNA viruses with an envelope and without an envelope. And in the case of coronavirus, it's an RNA virus with an envelope. So, sort of moving on and talking about Nanox technology, the first point worth making is that it's a unique technology that's been patented by Panasonic. It's not something that's been developed in the last 12 months as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. It's been developed over 20 years. It was initially developed to face all the challenges that were presented, particularly by Far Eastern countries, from some of the zoonotic viruses that emanated from China, essentially flu and respiratory viruses, which have originated from that country in recent decades. So obviously SARS-CoV-2 being one of those. So what exactly is Nanox technology? It's the nanoparticle is a charged water particle, and basically it's a water-rich nano. Consists of many OH radicals, or as we call them, hydroxyl radicals, and they're highly reactive and are often referred to as the detergent of the troposphere. Now, they react with lots of different pollutants, and they decompose them by cracking, and that's the chemical process where complex organic molecules are broken down into simpler molecules. Now, OH radicals are fairly unstable molecules, and they're always looking to react with other elements like hydrogen, for example, capturing it and with the reaction inhibiting the growth of other pollutants such as bacteria, viruses, molds, odors, etc., by breaking them down and neutralizing their effects, inhibiting them effectively. And by creating hydroxyl radicals contained in water, Nanox technology, significantly boosts their effectiveness, and increasing hydroxyl radicals' lifetime from less than a second in nature, without that addition of water, to more than 10 minutes, so that when we release Nanox into the atmosphere, into the air via a fan coil, for instance, it can spread over long distances and it lasts for quite a long time. So, and I'll cover that in a bit more detail as we get into the next couple of slides. So, looking at the illustration we have here, as we've just mentioned already, OH radicals, they want to become a stable substance. So when OH radicals reach a pollutant, be that a bacteria or a virus, they break down the virus's protein shell by taking away and converting the hydrogen parts into water. And in doing so, the virus's activity is inhibited. And that's quite important. We use that term a lot, inhibited. We don't say kill. It's very difficult to kill viruses, despite all the claims you see on the TV with sprays and things. We inhibit them. That's what we do. So how do we do this? So in terms of the technology, the Panasonic indoor unit has what we call a Nanox generator. Now, it's an atomized electrode produces condensation based on what we call the Peltier effect. Now, essentially, if an electrical voltage is applied to the Peltier device that you can see there on the slide, one end becomes hot and the other becomes cold. Now, when that electrical discharge is applied, you get microscopic water drops, dew drops, develop on the electrode, and then they're dispersed into the airflow from the generator. And when we get a bit further in, we'll explain the importance of that, particularly because that involvement of water and the combination of water with OH radicals is key to the technology. It's the uniqueness of the technology. I think it's also worth mentioning before we move on that the generator doesn't require any cleaning. It's completely maintenance free. It's constructed from titanium. And generally what we'd expect it to do is to last the lifespan of any fan coil that it's installed into, or any other device for that matter. So I think it's, as I said, we just mentioned before there, that the technology has been developed over a 20-year period. It's not sort of something that's been, as we said before, developed in the last year. It started in '97. The first device we introduced was in 2003, but with ongoing development and what have you, we've introduced a Mark I, and now we're on to our Mark II generator, which delivers 9.6 trillion OH radicals respectively every second. So it's quite a high volume. So I mentioned before, when we talk about the technology, there's really three key points that we need to consider. And the first, and arguably one of the most important, is water. The second is the huge quantity, and the third is their size, right? Their nano size. So again, let's look at these things in a little bit more detail. So starting off with the first key element, water. We mentioned before that OH radicals occur naturally in the environment, but they're unstable and they don't last for very long. You know, typically a matter of seconds. You know, so when we produce those from our nano device, they're enveloped. It envelopes the OH radicals in water, so we produce what we call a hydroxyl radical. And by doing so, that increases the lifespan of them by a considerable degree, by up to 10 minutes. So it means they're far more effective in a space when they're delivered into the airflow. So you might ask, why is this important? Well, you know, we know there's lots of ion type technologies out there, and whilst they'll have some effect, again, this issue of, because they're not combined with water in any way, shape or form, they have a very short lifespan. So because they want to, as they're released into the air, they want to bond very quickly with other molecules that are in the air. So things like oxygen and nitrogen, for instance, as shown on the slide there. And as a result, they really don't last for too long. Probably no more than seconds. In many cases, it can be slightly more. When you combine the ion with water, as we do, the technology increases much greater. The duration of time that it's in the environment is far greater. So as we said, up to 10 minutes. The second key element is the quantity of hydroxyl radicals. As we said before, you know, it's trillions, 9.6 trillion on the Mark II generator. It's delivered every second from a fan coil into the space. And this helps to give us really tangible effects in terms of what it's capable of doing. It allows them to, you know, completely fill the space with a constant supply. It means that ongoing cleaning of the air happens over a longer period. And it's worth also mentioning as well that function continues whether you're in heating or cooling. And even if you wanted to use if you're thinking about energy in that, you know, you could run the system on fan only, for instance, say out of hours when the building's closed, to increase the concentration and the effectiveness as well of that volume that's being delivered into the space when the area is not being occupied, to give you that additional cleaning and sanitization as time goes by. The third element we talked about is the size, and if you look at the illustration there on the slide, and you compare it to a tobacco smoke particle, we're between 5 and 20 nanometers in size. So against a smoke particle, we're around 1,000th of the size of a smoke particle. So being that small, it's quite important. It gets into all sorts of nooks and crannies. And it's, for instance, much smaller than, say, an equivalent steam particle. So as a result, it penetrates quite deeply into things like fibers. So if you've got, you know, cloth upholstery or clothing hanging on racks and that in a clothes shop, for instance, it's going to, you know, penetrate deeply into those fabrics and what have you, or your own clothes for that matter that you're wearing as well. So to recap on those sort of three crucial elements, we use water to encase the particles, giving them a much greater lifespan. We have a huge quantity of hydroxyl radicals. So again, it's making it very effective so that we cover the whole space, particularly as well hard surfaces such as desks, door handles, light switches and the like, for example. And the small size as well means that we can penetrate quite deeply into fabrics and any other nooks and crannies, as I said, as well. So it gets into everywhere. Just there as a simple illustration of a dental clinic where you might use a cassette fan coil. So again, we're going to be dealing with any airborne allergens and anything that's been adhered bacteria as well. One thing I would say about any environment, you know, again, this we're not suggesting for a minute that you don't have to do anything else. You know, going forward, we're all going to see a difference to the way buildings are cleaned and you know, but if nothing else, people washing their hands more and all these sort of things will have a huge beneficial effect on transmission of bacteria and viruses in workspaces. But this is, as I said, no silver bullet, but it's there in the background, working away solidly, helping bolster all the other efforts we're doing as well to actually improve the quality of the air in any spaces. Similarly, if you take a typical office environment or classroom or whatever that might be, where you've got terminal units, the same logic applies. Now, one of the things as well, I think it's important, you know, I mentioned there that Panasonic has had this technology in existence for over 20 years, developed over 20 years. So testing has been a key pillar of what we've done. So we have in excess of 140 validated tests covering a whole range of bacteria and viruses and other pollutants. The most recent ones from Europe with Texel Laboratory, an independent laboratory, have shown that we have clear inhibitory effects on SARS and SARS-CoV-2. And we've got links on the website to all this data as well if you want to see that. So it's all available to be verified and checked. And then when we look at general workspaces, obviously the technology is widely used in the Far East, but it's growing ever more present in the UK and in Europe. We install it into numerous areas, but it's also finding its way into other areas. For instance, many car manufacturers now, for instance, Lexus, install it into all of their entire range pretty much of cars. Toyota is starting to increase the number of cars they install the technology into. And as I say, it covers a wide range of our products. And most recently, we've had Jaguar Land Rover are now introducing it into their own vehicle range as well. So it's being used pretty widespread, and it's something that you'll see more and more of as time goes by. So that's it for me. That's the end of it. I guess it'd be a good time to maybe ask some questions and see where we go from there. Thanks,
Mick. We've running a bit over now, so
there we are. Yeah. Apologies.
That's all right. But we'll skip over the questions and we'll go straight to the video. But of course, anybody who needs to get in touch, we have the details. So for further information, please contact Mick or Panasonic, and we'll move seamlessly over to a Panasonic video if Sophie presses play.
panic.
So thanks to Mick and to Panasonic. Apologies, we're running a very tight schedule, so we're having to rush through to the next session. Apologies for a couple of technical gremlins. Electrostatics in the Kingston area. Without further ado, that's the 7th time I've said that already. Without further ado, I'm pleased to see the familiar face, the familiar visage of Graham Fox, Head of Technical at BESA, who's promising to give us the beginner's guide to IAQ. So
Even worn a tie, especially Andrew. Just
yeah, that's very, very nice.
I haven't had a tie on for about 6 months. So if I start to go blue in the face, please do let me know.
I was going to say in 30 minutes you've got to do the beginner's guide to IAQ.
Yeah.
So good luck with that. I will just quickly hand you over and I'll be back for questions. So thank you.
Hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yep, all fine.
Great stuff, perfect. Thank you. So yes, thanks Andrew for having me. And without further ado, the other week at the Building Engineering Services Association, we launched the Beginner's Guide to Indoor Air Quality. And I'm going to introduce that guide to show what we're using. We're using this guide, sorry, to address some of the challenges that building owners and facilities managers are facing, and also to try and raise awareness of what the actual issues are at the sharp end. So, so I'm desperately trying to minimize the screen here so I can see my notes. Indoor air quality, indoor environmental quality, common terms being used very, very frequently now in diverse circles. But how many people really understand what they mean? How many people understand what constitutes good or clean air? As building services engineers, we've understood for a long, long time that we need to bring outside air into an occupied building, like offices, shopping malls, etc. But with outdoor pollution levels being often so bad as they are, we can be exacerbating issues by drawing foul air into a building. And what about all the pollutants being created inside the buildings? So this beginner's guide to indoor air quality, which is the result of several months of collaboration between members of the BESA Health and Wellbeing in Buildings group. With it, we hope to debunk this hot topic. We are bombarded with good eating tips daily, advice on how much we should and shouldn't be drinking, more fruit, fewer carbs, more fiber, less alcohol, etc., etc. But compared to the 2 kilograms of food and 3 kilograms of fluid we take into our bodies daily, we inhale around 13 kilograms of air every day. And that's when we're being sedentary. If you're actually working out or involved in manual work, then that respiratory rate is higher. And so the volume of air that we take into our bodies and into our lungs is that much higher as well. Poor air quality affects the oxygen levels, which in turn make us tired, less able to concentrate, irritable, more prone to infection. So it's really essential that we address this issue in schools and factories and offices, but also in other public spaces like shopping malls, as I said, and cinemas, restaurants, bars, anywhere where the public will generally congregate. And all, of course, places that are currently looked at through the prism of the coronavirus pandemic. MPs across the House, experts from all kinds of backgrounds, everybody is now seeing the importance of ventilation in addressing the COVID mitigation problem. But many aren't grasping that the reason good ventilation is a COVID mitigation measure is because good ventilation is an IAQ improvement measure across the board. But I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail shortly. Building services in general aren't noticed when they're working well. You don't generally sit in an office saying, oh, I'm really comfortable, wonder what air conditioning they use in here. When everything is working, you just don't notice it. We often refer to the ventilation industry as a Cinderella trade, unseen and overlooked most of the time. So the newfound attention that this guide is bringing to the sector at political level is obviously very welcome. At the BESA, we've been investigating indoor air quality for some years now. We've been looking at the correlation between poor indoor air quality and outdoor pollution conditions. It's one of the reasons why the Health and Wellbeing in Buildings group was created in the first place. But trying to gain support for these concerns and raise awareness to the wider problems and in the wider public arena has frequently been like hitting a brick wall. lack of understanding, misunderstandings, too much technical terminology has turned people off, and then it's a very hard sell once they stop listening, basically. So the BESA Health and Wellbeing in Buildings group have created this guide to try and present the crucial facts in non-technical language, so that everybody can get a grasp of what the actual problems are. Professionals with responsibility for facilities management, for example, who may have no specialist knowledge at all of the subject matter. Building managers at schools and colleges, we heard earlier this morning from Gary Ratcliffe and Nathan and Jackie, they're talking about the importance of air quality in schools, such a crucial subject. It helps them to understand why and how they can take incremental improvements to their indoor environments. And with so many people working from home now, resulting in particulate matter building up in the home more readily, you'll also start to pull together some tips for optimizing the indoor air quality in the home and understand, crucially, the consequences of not doing so. It's estimated we spend around 90% of our time indoors in the UK. So to not look closely at the quality of air in the home can have catastrophic consequences on our family's health. Some common indoor pollutants we've heard already in other seminars, but I'll just cover a few of the common pollutants indoors. Particulate matter, so solids and liquids that are present in the air around us, produced by cooking, by cleaning, the shedding of dust and fibers from our clothes and furniture. Carbon dioxide, built up simply by people exhaling, and even with a low level of build-up, it can cause drowsiness and headaches, loss of concentration. VOCs, volatile organic compounds, produced by aerosol sprays, cleaning products, scented candles, printers and photocopiers, amongst many other things. Again, causing headaches, also causing eye irritations. The humidity level in the building, too high, and you may produce mold and fungus spores, causing allergic reactions and lung disease. Too low, and you could be drying out your eyes, causing irritation, and possibly leaving your body more susceptible to infection due to lowering the ability to fend off respiratory attack. Better ventilation and treating the air that is in the building to improve the quality of the air we breathe can bring real, tangible health benefits to the family and the nation as a whole. And with a call to action at the end of this document to get people involved in the demands for better air quality, better ventilation, healthier public buildings, healthier school environments for our children, we feel at the BESA that this beginner's guide to indoor air quality is exactly what the world has been waiting for to drive the issue forward and build momentum for a better, cleaner future. So I think we've established we know what the issue is, and we've tried to provide some simple guidance to raise awareness of these issues. But where are we going with all of this? I make no apologies for coming back to this subject or using the C word, coronavirus. We're all sick for up hearing about COVID-19. It has dominated our lives for over a year now. But it's important to note in the context of clean air and indoor air quality. At the BESA, we produced our first COVID-19 guidance in February last year. It quickly evolved, and VG002, which is known as sixth version, by the way, is widely used by local authorities, major businesses, building managers, even insurance underwriters have been asking schools if they have adapted their working practices in line with the BESA guidance. So it's safe to say it's been widely adopted, which has been really heartening. But it was initially a response to some wildly inaccurate newspaper reporting about how this new virus was being spread. Pre-pandemic status, and when much was still to be learned, we were answering some of the ridiculously loosely worded claims that air conditioning is spreading the virus. I argued at the time that this issue in the restaurant in Guangdong in China, which was the focus of the CDC and WHO attention, wasn't that an air conditioning system was running. It was other factors that were the cause of the virus being spread from one asymptomatic diner to another 8 people in his vicinity in the restaurant. And it's important to remember this because it's crucial to demonstrate how we've learned so much about the COVID transmission and other issues with indoor air quality in such a short period of time. This scenario, a typical public space, a bar, depicted here in an article in El País in on the 28th of October. It's a Spanish newspaper, an online version of Spanish newspaper, but equally applicable in terms of the science to any zone where multiple people come and go, such as schools, for example. And it can be shown to expose a high number of fellow patrons if an infected person is present, if no mitigating measures are taken. Basically, without any ventilation introducing outside air or air conditioning treating the air in circulation, then the viral load becomes so concentrated that there is virtually no chance of avoiding infection. Now, the exposure may be low, and the risk of becoming seriously ill may be low from this level of exposure, and that's for epidemiologists to debate. Our position as experts in the AC and ventilation sector is to advise on how our systems integrate into buildings and affect the airflows. Now, that same bar shown here with good ventilation being introduced that will dilute that viral load and massively reduce the exposure of the patrons, we'll see a huge reduction in passive infection rates. The changes of air in the occupied space are crucial in reducing risk of exposure. And I would recommend anybody to go to the Alpi's website and have a look, because it's actually got working diagrams of this. I've just got a couple of still images, but they have actually got working diagrams, which is really useful. And coming back to the humidity levels, we know that as the humidity level drops, then particles in the air can travel further due to them being drier and therefore lighter. So it's also crucial to consider humidity levels, airflows, discharge grill locations, the location of people in the occupied space in relation to the discharge or return grills, the airflow pattern where you have screens up. So a lot of offices where they couldn't actually socially distance desks have put kind of plastic screens between desks to try and avoid that direct airflow from somebody exhaling onto somebody sitting beside them. But the problem is that massively disrupts the actual airflow within that room as well. So that all needs to be considered. But the low humidity situation, by the way, is also why problems were exacerbated during the winter months, when the humidity in the UK is considerably lower. The website here, www.40to60rh.com, it was set up by Dr. Stephanie Taylor and her colleagues at Harvard School of Medicine. And what they're explaining is that the low humidity it's not that it affects the actual molecules itself or the virus itself, because studies have shown that actually humidity levels have very little effect on the virus itself. What it does do, though, is it affects the human body's ability to fend off viral attack, particularly in the respiratory tract. So again, I would recommend people go to that website and have a read of the really important work that Dr. Taylor and her team are doing at Harvard. BS ISO 16814/2008 is the standard building environment design indoor air quality. It defines what constitutes acceptable indoor air quality. But I've read this definition that's on your screen several times, and I'm still not really any clearer as to what it even means in practical terms. It can be interpreted in such wildly variant ways as to mean many different things to different people. Where the standard is useful, though, of course, is in setting out some of the parameters by which we need to measure good indoor air quality. Specifically, it sets out 3 methods by which you can express good indoor air quality. By health, short term, such as irritation to the eyes or throat, as we've discussed, or longer term issues such as cancers and asthma, etc. By perceived air quality, so that's where the majority of occupants express no dissatisfaction with the indoor air on the basis of odor or sensory irritation. Or thirdly, by the ventilation rate. Now, from a design point of view, it's normally the indirect ventilation rate method that is used, of course, because the designer can't know how susceptible the occupants of a building will be to odors. And the installation of sufficient ventilation will be seen as a measure of ensuring the health measurement doesn't come into play, of course. But that's all fine for new builds. For major refurbishment works, this is fine. But the vast majority of public buildings in use today are not new build. They're existing properties, frequently very old buildings that simply don't lend themselves to large ventilation systems or to centralized air handling units being installed. A number of schemes have popped up over the last year, where the quality of air in a building has been measured and the building owner or manager is given a certificate with a clean bill of health for their property. In reality, it's about as much use as a car MOT certificate. All it specifies or proves is that at that date and at that time, the indoor air quality was okay. But what about the next day when 50 or 60 more people have come into the office block? What about the next week after the commercial cleaning company's been in, done a deep clean, releasing VOCs into the atmosphere? What about next month when the sun is shining and the school teacher has opened those windows wide open to let air into the classroom, but the traffic is building up again outside, so the pollution levels are rising? The only way to properly certify buildings is by introducing ongoing monitoring, with reporting in real time to a common open source platform from which a certifying body can properly acknowledge the indoor air quality in that building is actually sufficient and crucially it's maintained. I've dubbed it BASH certification, buildings as safe havens, and we're reaching out currently to monitoring companies to work with us by providing API integration to an open platform from which we can certify that the user has satisfactory indoor air quality in their public building. It obviously has long-term benefits of ensuring buildings maintain good indoor air quality, but in the short term, it will also give the public the confidence to re-enter public buildings post-pandemic, spending their money, kickstarting the starved economy again. So this beginner's guide that we launched is the first step to achieving that by raising awareness and a better understanding of what the issues actually are. The technology exists to do this properly, but we clearly need political buy-in, cross-party, governmental and non-governmental organisations to gain the acceptance of this and drive the scheme forward. So thank you for that. I have really rattled through that, Andrew, to try and get us back on track on a time.
That's very kind of you, Graham. Where do we start? Where do we start? I'll tell you where we want to start. So BASH, which you know fully well that acronym is now going to pass into common parlance. Have you got the BASH? Have you got your BASH?
It's got a ring to it, hasn't it?
It has got a ring to it. So this is exactly my question, which is, there are people have said, you know, there's already certification out there. Why do we need more certification? And I'm sure you're prepared for that question. So
not at all.
Need more?
Not at all. Right off the top of my head, and off the cuff remark. No, I know there are other certification schemes out there, but from what I've seen, they tend to be, like I said, they're like the car MOT certificate, which tells you that at that day and at that time, the building's fine. And I saw a report of one such scheme, who shall remain nameless for legal reasons, so I don't get sued, who apparently went into an office block. They spent 2 days in there, taking all kinds of readings, and they then issued a certificate saying this building is COVID safe. Now, an empty office block is clearly going to have a very different quality of air in it than one that has 120 people working in it. So that's what I mean by it's meaningless. You know, you need to have the ongoing monitoring. So fine, you can have that initial clean bill of health, but unless you're actually going to monitor that indoor air quality over the days and weeks beyond, you don't know if that quality is actually being maintained or not. And that's what's crucial in terms of giving people that confidence back and improving the IAQ longer term.
How would you characterize the response of the building owner currently? I mean, it's a similar iteration of the question that I've asked at each stage so far, but what are the clients saying? Are they pretty clued up? Do they have any idea? Do they have no idea about what they need?
I don't think most people really have much of an idea, but it's primarily because most of them actually don't really understand what constitutes good indoor air quality, which is why we've produced the beginner's guide to try and strip back some of the terminology and present it in a much more approachable way. The idea is that we're disseminating this guide completely free of charge. It's on our website, free of charge. Don't forget to go and download your free copy off the BESA website. The purpose of that is we disseminate it to politicians. We want it to go out to schools, and earlier on it was mentioned about. I think Nathan was saying that his school they have no concept of what they're actually talking about. We want this guide to be used by schools, by colleges, by universities, by politicians, everybody, because they need to be able to understand what the basic problem is. So I think there's a lack of understanding of what the issue is just now, and that's what needs to be raised. And whether that's done, I think what we're doing is the first step. We need more mainstream media to pick up on it. So please do use your media contacts, Andrew.
I was just pausing there where I was
I'm
thinking,
sure you have
am I not
BBC on
am I
speed
not the
dial, surely.
mainstream media?
I'm sure surely you have the BBC on speed dial.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. That we've seen some quite shocking generalizations in the national media about all this, and it's about getting the positive message. Winning hearts and minds is the phrase we keep using.
Yeah, they have to. There's a tendency with national media, whether it be newspapers or the BBC, that when they're looking at things like this, they'll speak to architects instead of actually speaking to the people who deal with the buildings on a day-to-day basis. The architect is there to do the aesthetics and the initial design of the building, but the people who actually make the buildings work and more importantly fix things that have been designed badly are the building services engineers. And that's who should be getting consulted by media for input on things like this.
I'm going to throw a controversial question from the audience at you, so strap in. A questioner saying that very passionate about the fact that you're concentrating too much on passive measures and not on active virus killing in your guidance. What do you say to that?
I absolutely believe in active measures as well, but the first thing you need to do is actually improve the environment that you're working with, and that's a passive action, if you like. There are some issues with the active virus killing, for want of a better phrase, in that what I've seen, what we've all seen really over the last year, has been a huge upsurge in the number of companies with solutions, and they all say theirs is the best thing since sliced bread. What we often find is that, in fact, there are issues with some of the approaches, let's say. I'll give you one example. People have talked about having a standalone portable UV air cleaner. Now, if you have that in an office, you're going to have some kind of fan that's drawing the air through the chamber that has the UV in it. And similarly, if it's a HEPA filter, whatever kind of filtration or standalone unit you're putting in. My concern has always been that actually, if somebody, say you have an office with a dozen people in it, so kind of a large kind of office area with a dozen people in it, if you get that unit and it's sized for that volume of air, you're going to put that in the middle of the room. And it's inevitably going to be beside somebody's desk. So they're going to say, oh, this fan's too noisy, I can't work beside this. And it will get pushed away and pushed away and pushed away until that air cleaner is stuck away in a corner, out of sight, out of mind. That's going to do two things. One, the air quality in the corner of that office is going to be absolutely perfect, beautiful and clean. The air quality in the rest of the office floor will still be contaminated and won't be getting treated at all. And the second thing is, because they have the building manager or the building owner has taken steps to actually purchase one of these units and supply it, there's a false sense of security that they'll think, oh, we're okay, we've got this air cleaner in here, so everything's fine now. And the other measures that people need to take, such as putting a mask on when you're walking about the office, good hygiene routines, wiping your desk down when you leave it or before you sit down, things like that. All of those kind of measures will very rapidly go out the window. So there's a danger that if people do a bit, that they think they've done enough. And it's the actual portable air cleaners, active measures, all these things should all be taken in line with everything else. That's the critical thing.
It's back to what we heard in a previous webinar from Professor Nanox from SAGE, which is at the start, you've got to respect the hierarchy of risk.
Yeah.
This is always slightly disconcerting when the next chair appears as if up my shoulder to tap on my shoulder and say it's time, which means it's time, Graham. We've run out of time.
No problem.
Always a pleasure. The link, I think, to the beginner's guide will be made available after this session. But I'm sure you will allow me to say that if there are any particular queries, they can get in touch with Biza, with you via Biza.
Yep, absolutely.
Your expertise is always on hand. I speak from experience. So thanks very much, and we'll now move swiftly along as I hand over again to Neil to introduce the next session, or to introduce Carl. So it's over to you, Neil.
Thanks, Andrew. As you said, for our next session, I'll keep this short on my part, I promise this time. I'm delighted to introduce Cole Wolf, who's the Building Services Market Manager with Xylem. He's going to be joining us to share his experiences and views on the technology aspect of building safety, particularly with regards to water, and how that fits into the wider issue, I guess, of safe and efficient buildings. So Cole, it's all right if I can hand over to you. I'll leave it in your hands and I'll pepper you with some questions after as we go, if that's all right.
Yeah, thank you very much, Neil. So my name is Carl. I'm based here in Austria, in the middle of Europe, and I'm really happy here to speak with you today about building safety, because this is a very important topic. I'm working for Xylem, a water technology company, and today I like to bring the point of view how we look at safety and how we look at buildings a little bit from our perspective, from the water side, from the energy side, because there are so much things which we take as granted, or so much things which we see as safety on a daily basis. But I also want to get here more holistic view and looking into the future and how building safety is impacting our daily safety, but also the future of our safety. So having said this, I think let me quickly introduce what safety means to me. And safety means definitely being protected against hazards, injuries. This is not only for me, but only for my family, my wife, and my little girl. I want us all to live in a safe environment. And especially here in Europe, I'm sure we have a kind of a privilege, because we grow up and we live in a very safe and quite safe environment. And I think today we take this too often as granted, and we forget this safety that we have today has been built by generations and by technology development. And technology development is also the key how we can ensure future safety. So what does safety or building safety mean to me? Yeah? And for me, building safety is simply the key for safety in our lives, as already said, every day, but also in the future. And why this is the case? There are two major reasons. I think the first one is very well known, and we heard it also in the previous session. In fact, we are a kind of an indoor generation. We are spending around 90%, so 21 hours a day inside of buildings, in our residences, in schools, in universities, in offices, maybe in the moment not so often in offices, but of course also in factories, shopping malls, hopefully soon again, in gyms, in spa, unfortunately also in hospitals. So most of the time we spend in buildings. So there's definitely no doubt that building safety is directly connected to our safety every single day. And I think this is very easy to understand and very well known to us. And I think we can experience this whenever we are in a building. We see fire extinguishers, evacuation plans, we see emergency exits. So this is really visible to us. But there's much more which is not visible to us, but it's really very important to increase the awareness. And this is for me the bridge to the second reason why building safety is so important for our future safety. The climate change. And this sounds maybe a little bit holistic, but in fact our safety in the future is directly connected to the safety of our buildings today. Why this is the fact? Because 36% of our CO2 emissions are produced by buildings. So that means when we talk about safety and the future of our safety, we need to see this in this holistic view. We need to consider that we need to reduce the environmental footprint of buildings, not only in terms of energy and CO2, but also in the terms of water, because also 21% of the public water demand is consumed in buildings and by us in buildings. And by the way, did you know that yesterday, March 22nd, was the World Water Day? The World Water Day is coming from the United Nations. It has been founded in 1993. And it's the day where we celebrate water and we increase the awareness of water issues around the world. And when we talk about safety, we should also think about the 2.2 billion people that now, while we are speaking here, have no access to clean water and safe drinking water. Okay, so water consumption in buildings is with that also very important for our building safety. This can vary a lot depending on the type of the building and depending on the culture and the climate conditions. So shopping malls with a lot of restaurants have a totally different water load than schools or apartments. And it's really key to reduce our water, to reduce the energy consumptions of our water systems in buildings to contribute and support the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So summarized these quick sections, these two reasons, the indoor generation, the climate change are for me very important topics why we are depending on the building safety every single day, but also much more in the future. And energy and water are playing here also a key role or in the resources that we are consuming and impacting in buildings. So let's dive a little bit deeper into these topics, water and energy. So water, I guess all of us here in this conference are at home, are sitting inside of a house, at least most of us. And between me and the next, I'm only between you and the next break, because I think the next session on the agenda is a little break. And what maybe could do some of you when we have the next break. So maybe you stand up, and I think in Europe, in a lot of countries, we have at the moment the winter coming back, so temperatures decreased. So maybe you feel a little bit cold, you turn up a little bit the heating system. Maybe you're thirsty and you go to the water tap and you get a glass of water because you want to drink it. These are two activities which are fairly, I would say, standard activities in our daily life, but do you consider this as safety related? Most likely not, but it definitely is. Because by the safe drinking water from the tap is everything else than normal. Yeah? Before you can drink the glass of water, the water needs is coming through a lot of different kind of technologies. It needs to be gathered somewhere from the source. This can be different. This can be groundwater. This can be the sea. This can be a treatment plant, which is refurbishing water and treating water. There will be treatment technologies. The water will be pumped from the source via the treatment systems to your building before it is finally delivered to your tap. So we should not give it as granted that we have safe drinking water in our hands when we open the tap. And there are a lot of technologies needed to ensure that this water that you drink is treated, transported in the most effective way that we can do it, without waste of energy and water itself, because there are also a lot of water losses in the transport line. But today we speak about buildings. And when we talk about the second action, about turning up the heating system, in most of the buildings it's done automatically, but we have a lot of old buildings where we have to do it manually. We also impact energy and water, because most of the heating technologies are operated by water and transferring heat or cool with any kind of water or liquid. And did you know that 40% of the European energy consumption is used by such systems in buildings? So giving these two daily, I would say, standard examples, having safe drinking water at home, turning up the heat, feeling convenient at home with a nice temperature, is so closely linked to our safety and also to water and to energy. And today we talk about technology, and technology is the key to allow us these daily activities and to bring us in the position where we can somehow relax and ensure that we can continue to do this without having a very heavy impact on our nature. And for this, I'd like to share my screen quickly. When we talk about technology and when we talk about water technology, we talk about different layers of technology. Neil, can you quickly confirm that you see my screen?
Yes, it's come up fine there, Cole.
Okay, good. So this is our system approach, how we are applying technology to ensure the most effective use of water with the lowest energy footprint. It's all about digital solutions opening a huge opportunity funnel, which is of course closely connected to our safety, because when we're impacting our nature less, we will be more safe in the future. And with all these ongoing trends in nature, like water scarcity, extreme water conditions, aging infrastructure, everything what we experience, we are working on 3 different layers of technology, how to manage this and how to make digital solutions apply to get more accessibility to water, more resilience and more affordability. In summary, simply more safety for all of us. And these 3 different layers starts with the equipment that are in touch with the water directly. So we're talking here about intelligence products, which do sense the conditions, which are sensing the environment, and which simply control the equipment operation and optimize the performance of its operation by itself. So these are products, and we see in a lot of buildings, new one, but also in old ones, we see a lot of standalone products. But here we really need to start to see this as a wide system. So the first layer are intelligence equipment.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. It's Sophie Fries on the admin team here. You're on presenter view at the moment. Could you change it to full screen?
Okay, you see only the small screen. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, stop. Wait a moment. Let me share it again.
My fault, Carl. Causing confusion. Many apologies.
Okay, do you see it now?
Yeah. Perfect. Thank
Okay,
you.
good. So the second layer of technology, we need to centrally collect the data from our systems. Yeah, we need to centrally collect this, and we need to control the operation of our systems. We need to actively optimize how they work. And this is done by smart networks and smart services. So collecting data from the field and using the data for the central control. This can be also seen as a building management system. And the next layer, which is even more important now, are advanced data analytics. So we have our intelligent products, we are collecting the data, but now we need to get use of the data. So we need to transform the data into information around our environment. We need to be able to use this information to optimize the system and to take the best decisions based on system intelligence. And this is what is for us the approach, how to overcome the challenges today and how to create also accessibility, resilience, and affordability, and at the end safety in our water cycle, and especially also in buildings. And when we quickly talk about this kind of technologies, that we have a kind of a picture in our mind, I have some examples. So when we take this from a holistic view, from a kind of an island, yeah, and we look on the entire water cycle, and we look on intelligent equipment and sensors, there can be a lot of different technologies, and most of our new technologies are focusing, of course, building safety and how to make buildings more effective, how to give them a lower environmental footprint. So we're talking about smart circulators, we're talking about residential meters, which are smart and can be connected to the systems. We're talking about water boosting sets, which are boosting water according to the the real demand, and optimizing also here energy and CO2 footprint of building systems. Of course, we have a much wider range in systems in the water treatment plants, but let's focus on the buildings. When we talk about network, of course, we need to collect the data. So there are asset management service systems. There is connectivity. We need to collect all the data. We need to connect all the intelligent systems together to a strong network. And when we talk about advanced data analytics, there are solutions where we use this data which we have collected then to detect leak detections or condition assessments in the pipes. When we talk about buildings, there are HVAC optimization services. So we are not only talking about the pumps itself, but talking about optimizing HVAC systems, making smarter decisions. And I think when we talk about safety and buildings, this is really key. The key is about using technology, using digital data to make smarter decisions and more safe decisions, which are impacting us not only today, but much more tomorrow. Good, but I think for me, the one main question is now, okay, how to create these safety buildings with these technologies. We have technologies in all the different kind of layers of the buildings, in all the different functions, and how to connect this. And I think the importance of buildings to our safety is clear to us, and I think the urgency to act now is much more underlined by the fact that more than the half of the European buildings were built before 1970. So most of the buildings are older than 40 years. That means our safety does not depend only on creating new, more effective buildings with a better or positive CO2 footprint impact to the nature, but it relies much more on renovating old buildings and giving old buildings with less efficient systems and upgrade that we can here reduce the environmental footprint for these kind of buildings. And how do we do this? There are a lot of technical solutions for the application itself. The answer is how to implement this to new buildings and to be renovated buildings is also technology. It's also digital data. Building information modeling, so BIM is helping us to create the most effective buildings from the very first moment on. Yeah? So digital data of our products that we have just seen, of our equipment, of our systems, they need to be built and started from the beginning to assemble in a digital way before we create a physical building or update it. This digital data development, I think UK is one of the most leading countries in Europe, followed by the Nordics. When we go to Central Europe, there are countries around Germany and Austria where we're a little bit behind with the digital development. But this is definitely the key to optimize the buildings, to create water systems, but also other systems exactly according to demand and optimize them, ensuring that they have safe operation, but also ensuring that they keep us safe in the future by having the lowest impact to our environment. So at the end, my personal conclusion on safety is that technology will definitely support us to create building safety. It will help us to have the glass of water and a convenient ambient temperature in our houses without having an impact to our environment. But however, safety today and safety in the future will be also a result of our own behavior and our own decisions. So technology is helping us, but it will never replace our responsibility.
Excellent, thanks, Carl. That gives us plenty to get on there, particularly with my journeyman yeoman questions if they're not too simplistic. We do have some questions actually that have come in, Carl, on that one. And the first one, it was coming back to the point we were talking about data. Interesting to hear that the UK is perhaps getting somewhere with using some of that comparatively. But the question we have is that do you find from your experience the building owner has an idea about the potential of data, the data their building creates in his or her system? Is this something that you're seeing from building operators when they're coming to you and those you're working with, that they kind of understand that value, or is it still something that's quite hard to fathom how it works in terms of delivering concrete?
Yeah. So by my experience, the answer is it can be very different. So it really depends a little bit on the country, on the culture, especially when it goes to digital. I can tell you there's huge diversity in Europe, depending on north and south, west and east. Building owners are heavily interested in having the right building, having a return of investment. Most likely we look on the investment cost and later on the operational costs. Environmental impact is not so often, I would say, popular in the moment, but with all the activities around climate change, with all the governmental fundings where governments are supporting to upgrade buildings, where governments are supporting to create more effective buildings, we see also a trend in the building owners that they are changing. And I think there's also a huge change in the generation. So I would say there's a little bit there's a trend. I do not want to judge, but there's a trend that the older generation is less taking care for this, while the younger generation is taking more care for that. But I do not want to judge anybody here. But this is, I think, if we should map this out, I think it's really also kind of a generation change which is happening now, and we really need to do this together.
You're talking about the idea of generational change, some of the issues there. When you're coming with new solutions, with smarter solutions, as we talk about them, are there also concerns from building operators with regards to use of data, regards to safety and other areas? I wonder what the process of guiding them through that is. I mean, is that something possible to do, or presumably it still would be building operators who have a drive to do this, who perhaps already know about BIM, but just running from the safety side there, how does that sort of impact what you're able to do and how you do that?
Yeah, so talking about digital data, we see also here a big differentiation that a lot of building owners see the potential about using digital data to optimize systems, also in terms of safety, also to check and to operate buildings in a more effective and more safe way. We also see a trend that sharing information about the operation is always a kind of a tricky thing. So I think a lot of building owners, when we talk about digital solutions, are more afraid that data can be used in a different way than using it for the original intent to optimize the building and the safety.
So interesting. I mean, I guess this is kind of more specific to your own company view there, Carl, but from where Xylem are now in regards to some of the solutions you've mentioned in data, how do you see the company evolving, say, over the next 10 years, perhaps even in the longer term, with regards to how it provides technologies? Obviously, there's some water systems, but how are we expecting a big change? Will the components of the company still be very much what they are now, or does this necessitate a need for all companies, I guess, in building safety to change what they are fundamentally?
Yeah, no, there is a big change ongoing here. So safety is for us the most important thing in the daily business. So when we ever do meetings and we do things, we always start with safety tips. So when we talk about safety, I think Xylem, this is the topic number one. And when we talk about technological development, a lot of things are changing. And based on our history, we are a company which is built of a lot of different companies with a lot of different products. So when we look at this map on the island, which we have seen before, there are different systems from different companies. And I think the challenge which we see now in the market and in this building service stakeholders is exactly a challenge that we also in the moment working on here in our company. This is working together and seeing this as one holistic system. So not seeing it as a water system, as an electricity system, as an air system, looking on the buildings, on an environment, on one big thing. And this is for us as a water company, we are doing here, we are taking our products, feeding them with intelligence, connecting them together from the different parts of the company, making data analytics, adding services based on the know-how and the systems know-how that we have, and developing us. And I think this is exactly also what we see in the market. Companies, different providers of systems needs to work closely together, needs to share the data to run the most effective buildings and to really get them safe.
And that collaboration, does it have to be larger companies like Xylem themselves? In terms of how you facilitate that collaboration, what is leadership looks like there? Is that something, does it have to be the larger partner there, or does it perhaps come from more tech specialists? Does it come from companies, the sensor manufacturers? I was wondering how that relationship of collaboration really works with regards to more holistic technical solutions. Yeah,
so I think there are for me also two perspectives. So the one is definitely to work on the same target and the same goal. I think aligning the objective together, and today we all talk about safety, so I think we all agree about having a common goal is the most important thing. And sitting on the table as I would say as peers with the same objective will make the system most powerful. And I think the tool that we need, and this is the second layer, is all around digital data. And what we are doing when we talk about BIM, when we talk about digital data exchange, there are a lot of standards going on. We are working in our company with a lot of representatives in I would say in the European government, where we create standards about data exchange. We're having projects with universities where we talk about how to exchange and define digital data about our products and how to implement this inside of a big digital building. So I think summarized exactly two topics. The one, sitting together with peer, having the same objective, and the second is having the toolbox, having aligned data that can be merged together to one solution.
And also, thank you, Carl. The last question, I kind of always have to ask this in regards to when we talk about smart solutions and smart buildings, what we're referring to, and smart systems. Is this ultimately about automating our building functions, automating water controls, automating IAQ controls and systems? Or is that a bit too naive? Is that a bit sci-fi in terms of what this means, say, for the more immediate future of what systems will be? Is it just about automating, or is it about a wide system of understanding and having control there?
I think automating is definitely not the wrong word. I think the right one is making intelligent systems. So with these different layers, what we just have spoken about is we have a single product, a single device, which can be in a household and is connected. And this device needs already to be prepared to do the best in its operation. So we have this small single, I just take an example, circulation pumps, which are optimizing their operation according to the need, according to the daytime, according what they need to do. But on the other hand, then they're connecting and sending the information of their operation to a wider system. And it's all about connectivity. So when we talk about smart buildings, we need to talk about having really intelligence and smart products to do the right thing at the right time, but connecting also to a system to allow the system to behave correct and to make smart decisions. And for me, smart buildings will do smarter decisions for us by gathering all the data, and it's all about decision intelligence.
Brilliant. I mean, that's a great, an optimistic point to finish up on there, Carl. So thank you kindly for the time as always, and for going through those questions with me. And I'll pass back to Andrew.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carl. Hello, Carl.
Hello.
Hello. I've just been downgraded. Well, that was awkward, wasn't it? I disappeared from screen just on handover. which you probably all took to mean it's time for the break, which it is. The good news is we will be back after the break. We've had a fantastic first half. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to everybody who asked the questions as well. And do keep them coming in the second half. In half an hour's time, we're going to be back with discussions about the wellness standard, about building safety, and about fire safety. So plenty to get your teeth into. Normally at this point, if we were in a hotel for a conference, we'd break up, we'd have a nice hot meal, have a chat. But as it is, don't know about you, I'm faced with a sandwich. And the good thing is, I guess no one will know if you mix yourself a dry martini at this point. But I will see you back sharp at 1:15. So if you have no one to network with, just go and sit in a dark room for a while and think up some questions. See you after the break.